Welcome class 8. I've come back to you all with social studies. We will begin with lesson number 4, India in the 18th century. Now this lesson I'm going to read to you and explain. So please take out your social studies book, which is your history and civics for class 8. This is the book, history and civics for class 8. So move on to lesson number 4, and the chapter is India in the 18th century. Now you know that the Mughals flourished under the Mughal Empire flourished under the rule of the great Mughals. The first of whom was Bahadur, and the last of the Mughals was Aurangzeb. After Aurangzeb's death in 1707, the empire declined rapidly and the Mughals lost control. So basically, the Mughals ruled for a long time, right from Bahadur Shah, right till Akbar, till Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb died in 1707 and the decline of Mughal Empire began after that. As central authority weakened, the northwestern frontiers were left unprotected. So there was the thing that the central authority, the center, that is Delhi, the central authority weakened. It weakened because there was no proper ruling by the Mughals at that time, and they accidentally left the northwest frontier open, unguarded. They left it unprotected, and this attracted many foreign invasions. This exposed the weakness of the Mughals, and taking advantage of these conditions, the English, the French trading companies joined the regional powers in competition for political authority. So in the mid-18th century, the Mughals, the Marathas and the English East Indian Company, along with these three were the chief contenders. They were warring among themselves. They were warring among themselves. So here we have the Mughals, the Marathas and the English East Indian Company. So just remember, each one was fighting for political supremacy in India. By the end of the 18th century, the British were the ones who emerged victorious. So this all took place in the 18th. At the end of the 18th, the British emerged victorious, and they brought large parts of India under their control. So when they got victorious, they took large parts of India under their control. That means they started controlling large parts of India. Now to the next part, cause of decline of the Mughal Empire. What was the cause for the decline of the Mughal Empire? There was not one cause, but there were several causes, both within the empire and outside the empire. This led to the decline of the Mughal Empire. So the causes were in the Mughal Empire and as well as outside the Mughal Empire. So both these causes led to the decline of the Mughal Empire. First of all, we will come up with Aurangzeb's unwise policies. Aurangzeb was a bit unwise, and he made very weird policies which people did not follow or like at all. Aurangzeb reversed Akbar's policies of diplomacy and religious tolerance. So he reversed the policies of diplomacy and religious tolerance. He reimposed the Jiaza and permitted the destruction of temples. So he reimposed Jiaza and he permitted the destruction of temples. His Jiaza is an amount that you have to pay if you want to go on a pilgrimage. So he permitted the destruction of temples. His revenue collectors, they oppressed the peasants. He kept his collectors to collect revenue from the people, and these collectors, they oppressed the peasants. These factors led to the revolts such as of the Jats, the Bundelas and the Satnamis and the Sikhs. So these were the people who revolted against the Mughal, against Aurangzeb. So these people, which greatly weakened their empire. Aurangzeb also lost the loyalty of the Rajputs. He lost the loyalty of the Rajputs by interfering in their internal matters. Once Aurangzeb started interfering in the internal matters of the Rajput, he lost their loyalty also. And over here, because of Jyaza and the destruction of temples, the Jats, the Bundelas, the Satnamis and the Sikhs, they all got together and they revolted against Aurangzeb. During his long absence from North India, that is between 1681 and 1707, Aurangzeb became involved in the affairs of the Deccan and he neglected the administration of his empire. This allowed the ambitious nobles to become powerful. Roles of the nobles. What were the roles that he had given to his nobles? After Aurangzeb's death, three main groups of nobles spurged up. Three main groups, they came up. One was the Turanis of Afghanistan, the Iranis of Persia, and the Hindustanis of India. So these were the three main groups. They assumed the role of kingmakers. So these three individually assumed the roles of kingmakers. They hatched conspiracies to depose kings and raise rival candidates to the throne. The frequent change of rulers caused political instability. This allowed provinces to break away and also attract foreign invasion. Now these people, what they were doing, they were fighting among themselves. They put up new different people to represent the kingdom, and so they hatched conspiracies against each other. Finally, what happened? They started raising candidates to stand in rivalry against each other, and this caused a lot of political instability. Now these roles of the nobles, what they did was that they didn't gain anything as such, but they left the doors open to foreign invasion. Remember that. The role of the later Mughals. Aurangzeb's successor was called the later Mughal. So after Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal that came into power was called the later Mughal. He ruled for 150 years, that is in 1707 to 1857. So that is about 150 years. Important among them were Bahadur Shah I, Jahandar Shah, Firuzshah and Muhammad Shah. The latter Mughals were not as capable as the great Mughals, and the intrigues of the nobles made it all the more difficult for them to rule efficiently. Under them, the Mughal Empire broke up. The Mughal rule ultimately died in 1857. 1857 was the first time we had our Indian War of Independence. It was held in 1857. Breaking of the empire. During Muhammad Shah's reign, so the empire broke up. During Muhammad Shah's reign, some ambitious nobles established states that were virtually free from the Mughals' control. Some of these states were economically and culturally very prosperous and had strong armies. However, they failed to unite against any kind of invaders. Bengal. Now Bengal was one state which was run by Murshid Quali Khan. Murshid Quali Khan, who had been made the governor of Bengal in 1717. So remember, Murshid Quali Khan, he was made the governor of Bengal in 1717. He became almost independent. He and his successors recognized the administration of Bengal and they promoted agriculture and trade. Under them, Bengal became a very, very prosperous state. They, however, neglected the army and the navy, and they failed to check corruption among their officials. So much so that Bengal also slowly went into the hands of the British. Awadh. The state of Awadh became more or less independent under Sadat Khan. So Sadat Khan was the ruler of Awadh and it became more or less independent. And Sadat Khan was the governor of Awadh. He was the governor of Awadh in 1724. Sadat Khan and his successors introduced many administrative reforms. Okay, they raised a strong army. Awadh was one kingdom that had the strongest army. So they raised a strong army. They improved the economic conditions of Awadh. The Lucknowi culture developed under them, and Lucknow became a center of art and literature. So Awadh, the Lucknowi culture, they They also improved the economic conditions. Along with that, they developed the Lucknowi culture. So much so that the Lucknowi culture, the center Lucknow was the center for art and literature. And a new form of architecture based on the Mughal style also developed, which is best represented by the Imam Bara at Lucknow. So the beautiful Imam Bara at Lucknow was the new form of art and architecture. We move on from Awadh. So Awadh was a totally independent state and a very, very strong state. But later on we will learn that Awadh was taken over by the British. Hyderabad. In 1724, Chin Kwalij Khan. Now this Chin Kwalij Khan, better known as Nizam ul Mulk. So we'll stick to Nizam ul Mulk. So he was known as Nizam ul Mulk. He forced Muhammad Shah to give him the title Asaf Jahan. To give him the title of Asaf Jahan means ruler of the kingdom. Okay, and recognize him as the governor of Deccan. Thereafter, he became virtually an independent ruler and he established the state of Hyderabad. He crushed the rebellious chiefs and the state of Hyderabad progressed under his administration. So he was very firm about holding on to the reins of Hyderabad and to run Hyderabad according to his will. So Hyderabad prospered under his administration. Then we move on to Jaipur. But before moving on to Jaipur, on page number 30, you have a Lucknowi culture. Please read that down. It gives you an information of what Lucknow is famous about. Jaipur, the Rajput state of Amber, later Jaipur. So Amber was the Rajput state which is now present day Jaipur. It rose to prominence under Savai Raja Jai Singh. Jai Singh founded the city of Jaipur and made it a center of art and scientific learning. He was deeply interested in astronomy and he built observatories at Delhi, Jaipur, Ujjain, Varanasi and Mathura. Bharatpur and Rohilkhand. So Bharatpur and Rohilkhand. This belonged to the Jats of the region. Around Delhi, Agra and Mathura, they established the state of Bharatpur, while Rohila, the Afghans, they formed the state of Rohilkhand. So the Jats formed the regions around Delhi, Agra and Mathura and established Bharatpur. Okay, but Rohila was Afghans. The Rohila Afghans, they formed the state of Rohilkhand, covering the territories of Moradabad, Bijnor and Bareilly in Uttar Pradesh. So Rohilkhand was around Moradabad, Bijnor and Bareilly in present-day Uttar Pradesh. This was Rohilkhand. Why? Remember, Bharatpur evolved around Delhi, Agra and Mathura. Foreign invasion. There was a lot of foreign invasion. Now scientifically, if you go to CE, as we said, it was a center for scientific learning. There is one Jantar Mantar which is in Jaipur. It is the observatory which was built by the Jantar Mantar, which even stands today, dear friends, students. This stands even today. Today you can go and visit the Jantar Mantar, which is the observatory which was built by Savai Raja Jai. Okay, so Savai Raja Jai Singh had built this observatory. It still stands even today. Foreign invasion. We move on to foreign invasion. Taking advantage of the unstoppable political situation in India, the Persian ruler, we have a Persian ruler, Nadir Shah. He invaded India. He defeated the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah at Karnal in 1739. So Nadir Shah invaded and he defeated the Indian ruler Nadir Shah. The Persian invaded India. Nadir Shah. He was a Persian, he invaded India and he took over, he fought against the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah This invasion took place at Karnal in 1739, and Muhammad Shah was restored to his throne only after he ceded. Muhammad Shah, after Nadir Shah won, Muhammad Shah was given back his throne only if he ceded, if he accepted. That means only if he ceded means only if he gave up. Only if he gave up all the territories. He had to give up all the territories west of the Indus to Nadir Shah. And thus they went permanently out of control of the Mughals. Once he gave up west of the Indus, slowly they lost their supremacy, and it all went into the hands of the Afghanistanis, and the Mughals lost control. Nadir Shah carried away enormous wealth. So Nadir Shah was very smart. He carried away enormous wealth, including the Kohinoor diamond and Shah Jahan's jewel-studded peacock throne. Nadir Shah's invasion exposed the weakness of the Mughals. After this invasion, the Marathas expanded northwest and threatened the Mughal authority. Nadir Shah kept coming back again and back and forth and fighting wars, and he kept looting and taking all the beautiful, taking gold, gems, jewelry that he captured during his wars back to his country. The Marathas, they slowly expanded, they moved on northwards, and they threatened the Mughal authority. Between 1748 and 1761, the Afghan ruler, there was another Afghan ruler, Ahmad Shah Abd Ali. Now Ahmad Shah Abd Ali, he also was another very cunning Afghan ruler, and he also invaded India many times. He invaded India several times. In 1761, Ahmad Shah Abd Ali, he inflicted a crushing defeat on the Marathas. So he fought against the Marathas in 1761. And that was in the third battle of Panipat. So that was called the third battle of Panipat. This destroyed the possibility of the Marathas replacing the Mughals. The Marathas went forward northward in the hope that they would replace the Mughals. But all their hopes fell apart when the Afghan ruler Ahmad Shah Abd Ali, he invaded India several times, and he had confronted the Marathas in the third battle of Panipat, and replacing the Mughals as superior power in India. This event also cleared the way for the British to emerge as a political force in India. So the people were fighting among themselves. Jaipur, Bharatpur, Rohilkhand, Nadir Shah, all the invasion of Nadir Shah, the invasion of Ahmad Shah Abd Ali, all these people invaded, but they all didn't realize that with every invasion, with every with every kingdom they conquered, they were opening the doors for foreign invasion, which was the British, apparently. So, important regional powers of the 18th century. We have a few important regional powers that were there in the 18th century. The first important power that was there in the 18th century were the Marathas. They were fearless and they fought. Shivaji united the Marathas politically. Under him, the Marathas put up a strong resistance against the Mughal expansion in Deccan. Shivaji died in 1680. In 1689. Shivaji died in 1680. But in 1689, the Mughals under Aurangzeb defeated and killed Shivaji's son, Shambhaji. They also captured Sambhaji's infant son, Shahu. Okay, Shivaji II. Shambhaji's brother Rajaram, he fell fighting at Satara in 1700. Therefore, Rajaram's widow Tarabai, she ruled the Marathas from Kolhapur on behalf of her minor son Shivaji III. So, Shahu, who was a very small infant, his mother Tarabai ruled the Marathas from Kolhapur on behalf of her minor son Shivaji III. So this is the rise of the Peshwas. This is how the Peshwas rose and came into power. Bahadur Shah won. Bahadur Shah I, he succeeded Aurangzeb in 1707. That is the last. King. Released. He Bahadur Shah I. He released Shahu. Shahu was under capture. If you remember earlier on when I mentioned it, right? The Mughal under Aurangzeb, Aurangzeb killed everybody and he captured Shahu. So Bahadur Shah came into the picture, and after he succeeded Aurangzeb. After he succeeded Aurangzeb in 1707, Bahadur Shah, he released Shahu and Shivaji the third. So he released both of them. Shahu and Shivaji the third were released. Shahu emerged more powerful with the help of Balaji Vishwanath. Balaji Vishwanath was a very, very ferocious administrator and a very good warrior. And under his administration, he conquered a lot of kingdoms. So, Shahu emerged powerful with the help of Balaji Vishwanath. He was a shrewd revenue officer also. While Shahu established his capital at Satara, so this is the rise between the Peshwas. Shahu established his kingdom at Satara at Satara. While Shivaji III, he established his capital at Kolhapur. So there were two capitals. Shahu's was at Satara and Shivaji III's was at Kolhapur. So with all this constant warfare between Satara and Kolhapur, now these two were fighting for supremacy. They wanted to lead the Peshwas individually. So Shahu and Shivaji III, they kept fighting among themselves continuously, and it kept them totally preoccupied. He grew increasingly dependent. Shahu grew increasingly dependent on Balaji Vishwanath, whom he made his Peshwa. So Shahu was dependent on Balaji Vishwanath, and he gave Balaji Vishwanath the Peshwai, the same. He made him a Peshwa and he gave him the title of Peshwai, and he gave him the title of Peshwai, which is also known as the Chief Minister. Gradually, the Peshwa became the real ruler of Maratha. So gradually, Balaji Vishwanath, with his Peshwai and his power of administration and his warriorship, he became the ruler of the Marathas. Balaji Vishwanath got the Mughal emperor to recognize Shahu as the rightful ruler of the Maratha. In return, the Mughals were promised a tribute and military support in the Deccan. Balaji Vishwanath also cooperated with kingmakers in the Mughal court. Balaji Vishwanath also divided the Maratha territories among chiefs who were given the task collecting revenue. The chiefs were allowed to keep a part of the collection to meet their expenses. This made them powerful and ambitious. So if you remember the Deshpandis, they were given these chiefs actually. He divided them and he gave these territories to these chiefs. The Deshpandis, the Gokhales, and so on. And he gave each one of them a different territory to collect revenue and to run the territory. Now these chiefs, they started taking power into their own hands. This made them more, so when they got some sort of independence and they were made chiefs of particular territories, they got power into their own hands. They became powerful and they were more ambitious. Bajirao I. He succeeded his father Balaji Vishwanath. Now Bajirao I was the son of Balaji Vishwanath. He was the son, and after Balaji Vishwanath died, Bajirao succeeded him. So Bajirao I succeeded his father Balaji Vishwanath in 1720. Through a treaty, he made peace between the Marathas of Satara and those of Kolhapur. So Bajirao basically was the Maratha of Satara, and you know Shivaji III was the ruler of Kolhapur. So when Balaji Rao took over this kingdom after his father's death, Balaji Vishwanath's death, he tried to make peace with Kolhapur. And when he made peace with Kolhapur, the Maratha kingdom gradually then started to expand. Bajirao I, however, it started expanding under the rule of Bajirao I. But the expansion was mainly carried out by the personal armies of the Marathas. This you must remember, the Maratha chiefs, and not by the Peshwa troops. So the Maratha chiefs, that is the Gokhles and the Deshpandes and the Deshmukhs, they were the ones who carried out the war, and it was not done by Peshwa army. So this Peshwai troops. So by 1737, Maratha influence extended over many kingdoms. They extended over Malwa, Gujarat, Bundelkhand, and the outskirts of Delhi. So Maratha expanded in a vast way. They took over parts of Gujarat, they took over parts of Malwa, they took over parts of Maratha, Bundelkhand, and they also reached the outskirts of Delhi. So, they moved on. Some of the chiefs like Sindhya, there was some chiefs like water. Sorry children, just a minute. I'm getting, my mouth is turning parched. So just let me have a sip of water. I'm sorry. So, as I earlier mentioned, Maratha chiefs, as I earlier mentioned about the Maratha chiefs, right? One of the chiefs was the Scindias, of Gwalior. He was the chief of Gwalior. Bhosle was in Nagpur. So the chief of Nagpur was Bhosle. Then we move on to the Gaikwads. The Gaikwads were the chief of Baroda. The Holkars were of Indore. So these were the chiefs that were given territories by Bajirao I. So you must remember who had which territory. The Scindias had Gwalior, right? The Bhosles, they had Nagpur. The Gaikwads had Baroda, and the Holkars were powerful in Indore. They became almost independent of the Peshwa's control. They started turning so powerful, they built their armies. These kings, they built their armies, and they built the territories that were given to them, and they made themselves so powerful that the Peshwai lost total control over them. So Peshwa lost control over these chiefs. Bajirao I then captured Salsette. He captured Salsette and Bassein on the Konkan coast from the Portuguese. So Bajirao then moved on. He moved on to the Konkan coast. He captured Salsette and Bassein that was held by the Portuguese. He took it away from the Portuguese. He, however, paid little attention to the administration of the newly acquired territories. He didn't bother much about Salsette and Bassein. Balaji Bajirao, he was also known as Nana Sai. He succeeded his father Bajirao I. So now we come to Bajirao I's son. Balaji Bajirao. Don't make a mistake. Bajirao I's son was also Balaji Bajirao, but known as Nana Sahib. He succeeded his father Bajirao I in 1740. After Shahu's death in 1749, the Peshwai shifted Maratha capital to Pune. So from Satara, the Peshwais shifted to Pune, while Shahu's successor remained in Satara. So Shahu's successor continued to live in Satara, but the Peshwais moved to Pune. Under Balaji Bajirao, the Maratha established their influence over Karnataka. Okay, they won vast territories from the Nizam of Hyderabad and from the rulers of Mysore. They also brought Malwa and large parts of Bundelkhand under their direct control. They angered the Jats, the Rohilas of the Rohilkhand, and the Nawab of Awadh by by raiding their territories and forcing them to pay tribute. In 1751, the Marathas forced the Nawab of Bengal to cede Odisha and pay tributes. Well, you all must have seen, I don't remember the name of the picture, but it's a very famous Hindi picture in which they show you Nana Sahib. He marries Mastani from Bundelkhand. Mastani was the princess of Bundelkhand. So he marries Mastani, and he was very ferocious. And Nana Sahib was a very ferocious ruler, and he was a very ferocious ruler.
Bajirao Mastani.
Yeah, Bajirao. Oh, sorry, the name of the movie is Bajirao Mastani. So this is all based. Bajirao Mastani was based on Nana Sahib, who was a very ferocious warrior, and he took over many kingdoms. So he took over Rohillas from Rohilkhand. He took over the Nawab of Awadh. He took over their territories and forcing them to pay tribute. Maratha and the Nawabs, and he went to the Nawab of Bengal to cede Orissa and pay tribute. In 1757, the Marathas helped the Mughal emperor by removing the agent that was posted in Delhi. There was an agent which was posted in Delhi by Ahmad Shah Abdali. And in 1758, they took Sri Hind and Lahore from Afghans. All this made the war between the Marathas and the Afghans inevitable. So this is how he ruled. He ruled very ferociously. Nana Sahib was the last standing ruler of the Maratha kingdom, and he was a ferocious ruler, and he ruled his country for a long time. He ruled his kingdom for a long time. But eventually they had to come into contact with the Afghans. With the Afghans, the third battle of Panipat, which took place in 1761, Ahmad Shah Abdali entered into an alliance with his enemies of the Marathas. So Ahmad Shah Abdali couldn't fight the Marathas on his own. So what he did, he entered into an alliance with the enemies of the Maratha. Mainly the rulers, he entered into alliance with the rulers of Rohilla, Awadh, and Balaji Bajirao sent an army which met Abdali's forces on the battlefield of Panipat. In 1761, the Marathas lost many of their brilliant leaders and soldiers in this battle. Unable to bear the shock of defeat, Balaji Bajirao died the very same year. So that was the end of Nana Sahib. Because Nana Sahib had taken over so many kingdoms, but those very people who he had under his kingdom, they went to Ahmad Shah Abdali. They gave their army to Ahmad Shah Abdali, and Ahmad Shah Abdali, with the help of these people, went into a war with the third battle of Panipat, where the Marathas lost terribly, and they lost a lot of their warriors, their very strong warriors. And so the shock of losing the first battle against Ahmad Shah Abdali was great, and Balaji Bajirao, he died the same year. Nana Sahib died the same year. This was the cause of Maratha failure. So therefore the Marathas did not receive any local support. They made enemies of the local powers by raiding their territories, and they had made no effort to win over their loyalty. So much so they started declining. As a result, the Maratha army was desperately short of supplies on the eve of the war. The Marathas also made the mistake of not adopting modern military techniques and weapons. Besides, they were weakened by the infighting among their chiefs. So there was a lot of fighting among their chieftains, and this also weakened them. The event after 1761, the defeat at Panipat ruined the possibility of the Marathas replacing the Mughals. So much so that as all India power, this allowed the English and the East Indian Company to become a political force in India. However, with a decade, the Marathas recovered and tried to re-establish themselves as a political power. Ahmad Shah Abdali had left Nijam. He had left one of his men who was called Najib-ud-Dawla. Dawla. He kept Najib in charge of Delhi after the Battle of Panipat. This was around 1772. Following Najib's death, the Peshwa, Madhavrao I, escorted the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II to Delhi. After Madhavrao, the Peshwa power declined. So Madhavrao I was the last Peshwa power. After that, the Peshwa power began to decline. He tried to get back something by helping Ahmad Ali Shah's person who Ahmad Ali had left in charge. That person was Najib, and he tried to help them in the battle at around 1772. Najib died. And after Najib's death, the Peshwa Madhavrao, he escorted the young Mughal emperor Shah Alam II to Delhi. Shah Alam was the emperor after Najib. But still, after Madhavrao I, the Peshwa's power declined. So we finished with the Marathas. Let's move on to to Mysore and the Sikhs. We've got only two parts left: the Mysore and the Sikhs. Now the Mysore. In the middle of the 18th century, Mysore was ruled by a king who was dominated by his corrupt ministers. The ruler of Mysore, he was very, very rich, and he had a whole lot of ministers to work with him. Basically, he was a very lazy, lenient man. All he loved in life was music, and he used to indulge in literature, art, and music, and he never bothered much about the administration of Mysore. He left it all in the hands of his minister. A soldier in his army. He had a soldier in his army who was called Hyder Ali. Hyder Ali therefore fought many wars for the ruler of Mysore, and he made his mark as a very strong warrior and as a very strong contender. People used to think of Hyder Ali and they used to think of death. So he really had scared all the people around. So Hyder Ali very soon came into power, and when he was fighting the wars between Mysore and its neighboring kingdom, he rose to a high rank. Hyder Ali slowly rose to a very high rank. Hyder Ali took over the reins of the government in 1761. Now the king of Mysore, he was really gone, because all he used to do in those days was listen to music. He had many wives, and he indulged in Madeira, and he didn't bother much about his territory. He had handed everything over. He was not a very good administrator. He didn't want to get involved in wars and politics. So he wanted to live the life of luxury. So Hyder Ali went over and fought many wars for with the kingdoms around, and he went into a higher rank. Thereby, eventually, Hyder Ali took over Mysore in 1761, and he proclaimed himself as the ruler of Mysore after the king's death. So in 1761, when the king died, Hyder Ali became the ruler of Mysore, and he proclaimed himself the king. Hyder Ali soon made Mysore a powerful state. He modernized the army and expanded his territories. The British regarded him as their most dangerous rival in South India. So the British were very scared of Hyder Ali, and Hyder Ali didn't allow anybody to get into the kingdom. The Sikhs. After the death of Guru Gobind Singh, the Sikhs came under the leadership of Banda Bahadur. The Sikhs came under the leadership of Banda Bahadur, and they rebelled against the Mughals, but was captured. The Sikhs under the ruler of Banda, they rebelled against the Mughals, but they were captured. He was killed. Banda Bahadur, his name was Banda Bahadur. He was the last ruling Sikh. he confronted the Mughals, and in the war he died, he was killed. That was in 1716. The Mughal took control over the Sikhs weekend after the invasion of Nadir Shah and Ahmad Shah Abdali. So later on, Nadir Shah Ahmad Ali invaded the Sikhs and also Ahmad Shah Abdali. While fighting against the foreign invaders, the Sikhs extended their influences over Punjab, Kangra and Jammu towards the end of the 18th century. However, they were divided into 12 rival political groups. Now, these Sikhs also, they were divided right up from Kangra, from Punjab, Kangra, right to Jammu. It was all Sikh land, but they were divided into 12 different political parties, and they each one the group called missiles. They were called missile, MISLS, missiles. So they called themselves missile. Ranjit Singh, he united the Sikhs living west of the river Satluj. So all the Sikhs living into the west of the river Satluj were united by Ranjit Singh, and he established an independent Sikh state of Punjab. So west of Satluj, Ranjit Singh took over. He united all the individual small kingdoms of Sikh kingdoms, and he formed it into one great kingdom called Punjab. Ranjit Singh also conquered Kashmir, Peshawar and Multan, and built a strong army on the Western principles. So he was a man, a learned man, and based on Western principles, he saw how these foreigners, the British and how the French and the Dutch that were invading, he saw how they ruled and what principles they used. He used those same principles, and under that he formed Punjab and the territory, and he took over the territory. He conquered Kashmir, he conquered Peshawar and Multan. Now Peshawar and Multan in present day is in Pakistan. So he conquered these kingdoms and he ruled it till the day he died, and then after that the British came into power, but Punjab didn't give much to the British. But slowly, eventually, when you go on further after the 1857 revolution, slowly, of course, the British took over many kingdoms of India under the different lapses, like the doctrine of lapse and this thing. There were many different reasons they put up, and they took over kingdoms that were in India. That we will learn about later on. So this is your lesson done. You have to answer the following questions in 1 or 2 sentences. You have to answer the following questions with reference to, and you have to fill in. There is an example of fill in the blanks. So you state also that there is true and false for you, and there is also you write the happenings in a sequence, which came first. Okay, so this is what you have to do. So your exercise, which is on page 35, please complete it and write your notes in the question in your notebook. All answers to be written in your notebook. Please do not write the question. Write the answer to the question. Thank you, and I think I am done with this. So you can read the lesson and go through it while it is still fresh in your mind. So since I have finished this lesson, my kind request to you people is to immediately read the lesson once again, so you will not get confused. This is done part by part of each kingdom and each ruler. Later on, they will all mix together and you will have some confusion. So please be careful, and thank you.